Hello and welcome back, dear friends of fine role-playing and storytelling, to Fumbling Forward episode 2. My name is Maurizio, and today I want to talk about how you can come up with great ideas on how to create conflict for your scenes and your role-playing sessions. Before I get started, I really want to thank you all for supporting me during the first episode. I had really great comments from all of you, giving me feedback, critique, and even praise. And especially I'd like to thank Aegon of Astora, who really took the time to analyze my last video and gave me an extensive feedback on what I can do to even improve on that. So thank you, Aegon, and thank you all for continuously supporting me and helping me out, giving me critique and praise so I can improve on these videos, and hopefully this video is better than my first one. Hey, I even got rid of most of the sound effects, didn't I? If that's the case, I would really like you to give me a comment in the comment section below and tell me what you liked and what you didn't like. So I would like especially to thank all of you who commented on my last video. Namely Martin, Alexis and David, Sinclair Lore, Applage TV and the Dynarch. I hope I pronounced the Dynarch correctly. Is it Dynarch? Dinarch? Aegon, I know how you feel right now. So with the thank yous and praises out of the way, I would really like to start with the topic of our episode today, namely conflict. So last time, in my very first episode, you will find the link to it right here, we talked about scenes and how you can structure your storylines or your game sessions scene by scene, and what benefits this kind of approach has in store for you as a GM. And as a player, obviously. So there are a great many books on storytelling and what keeps your narration going and what drives your characters, and they all have one thing in common, and it's called conflict. And so in every story you ever heard, the main drive was conflict. You may have heard of the hero's journey. Oh, please God, not the hero's journey again. The hero's journey is like an archetype for stories, and if you Google it, you will find a lot of stuff on it on the internet, and there are many books about it. But essentially, the hero's journey is the main structure of every book and movie you will read or watch. Although the hero's journey is a quite old concept deriving from mythology of old, like the old stories people told each other about the gods and heroes, it's still relevant today. The hero's journey was analyzed firstly by anthropologists who tried to find common patterns in different narration styles and different stories. And what they found was that there really is a common structure to all this. So then in 1949, a real smart American professor of literature called Joseph Campbell came up with a book that's called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And this book essentially describes the hero's journey. So if you're interested in that, we will talk about it maybe in another episode in detail, but that's essentially where these common patterns come from. So if you're interested in the hero's journey, I would gladly oblige to tell you more about it in a future episode. Please let me know in the comment section below. But for now, just so you know, that's the place where the idea of common patterns in stories and conflict as a main driver of stories and narration derives from. So one thing that was a real eye-opener for me once I started digging into the study of narration and story was the distinction between story and plot. You oftentimes use both terms synonymously, although they essentially describe different things. What really helped me to distinguish both is to think about the plot as a skeleton and the story as the flesh of a narration. So plots are essentially those patterns Joseph Campbell found. And there are many more than just the hero's journey. But one and the same plot can be reused over and over and over again without you even noticing. And that's what the hero's journey is as well. You wouldn't notice unless you really analyze different movies or different books regarding their underlying structure. And then you realize, okay, there really is some essential patterns that are the same. And those patterns are called plots. So plots can be essentially the same for two different stories, However, they are fleshed out in a different way. So for example, one plot could be that the hero has to find a certain object, normally called in storytelling the MacGuffin. So the MacGuffin could, for example, be the One Ring in Lord of the Rings. Or it could be Luke Skywalker as a person in Star Wars The Force Awakens. Everybody is searching for a certain object or a certain person, and both films essentially have the same subplot. Heroes try to find a certain object or a certain person, but obviously they're quite different. So you know the one about the fantasy guys with the lightsabers killing each other, and the other one was about little people trying to flush a ring down a volcano, essentially? No? Okay. But from a plot point of view, they're almost the same. They have different stories, but the same plot. To be honest, after reviewing this particular part of this video, I realized that The Force Awakens and Lord of the Rings are not exactly the same story. That's mostly because in Lord of the Rings, the characters are not in search for something, but they want to drop the ring in a volcano. Whereas in Star Wars, they're actually looking for something, Luke Skywalker. So a better example would be 12 Monkeys, where they're actually looking for the 12 monkeys and what they are. Or the mythological story of the Holy Grail, where King Arthur and his knights are looking for the Holy Grail. Those are both story-wise totally different stories, but the plot is more or less the same. You got a MacGuffin and you're looking for this MacGuffin, and the characters looking for this MacGuffin in those stories. To be sure on what a MacGuffin is, a MacGuffin doesn't have to be the thing that the characters are looking for inside the story. So the example with Lord of the Rings actually is viable MacGuffin-wise, because in the Lord of the Rings, the One Ring actually drives the story. Although it's not the thing that the characters are looking for, it's the thing that the characters are caring for and want to protect in order to get it to the volcano. You know the story, god damn it. So in general, the MacGuffin describes objects or people that drive a story, that are essential to the story, and that people inside the story care about most. And now you maybe ask yourself, what does plot and story and Joseph Campbell has to do with conflict in my role-playing session? He's back on topic? Okay. Essentially, if you want to talk about conflict and about structuring your narration, you have to talk about plot, and you have to know the difference between plot and story. So let's dive right in and talk about conflict. So when I talk about conflict, I'm talking about 3 essential types of conflict I need to come up with a great story and to structure my scenes. And those 3 types are called conflict of plot, conflict of location, and conflict of character. So in this storyline, I will mainly talk about the conflict of plot and keeping the conflict of character and location for my next episode, because otherwise this will be like an hour-long episode again. Like the last one was... it was long enough. Let's start with the one we already talked about a lot, the conflict of plot. And the first thing you need to know about the conflict of plot is that you have different units, story units, you have to look at in order to structure your narration. So I'm used to structure narration based on units known from TV series. So I use scenes, episodes, seasons, and the whole series. And each one of them has their own plots. So to transfer this idea of series, episodes, seasons to your game sessions and your gaming group, you essentially have to do a little bit of work beforehand. Think about a series as your whole campaign. So everything that is in one timeline and with the same characters and is one story, you can call a series. and you can chunk up your series in different parts, essentially by thinking about some units inside your some aspects, some units inside your main campaign. For example, if there's a certain enemy an enemy is a main driver, you see conflict. If there's a certain enemy or arch enemy of your party and your main characters, your heroes, you can think about the first introduction of that main enemy and the final confrontation, in which normally the characters will win, as one season, for example. So chunking up your campaign by the enemies your characters are facing, or the conflicts your characters are facing, there it is again, is a great idea to really get the gist of what a season could be. Then an episode is simply your game session, the evening at which you play, and the scene, we already talked about that, are the different scenes inside one evening with the different characters you're looking at or the different locations you're looking at and switching in between. Because in my opinion, it's optimal if your game session is played out scene by scene. So now you have your series, you have your seasons, and you have your game sessions, your episodes, and you have your scenes, the smallest part of this narrational structure. So each and every one of these story units has their own goals, has their own conflicts, has their own plot. And that's what I call conflict of plot. So when I look at a certain scene, the first thing I do, because it's the easiest one, what's the conflict of my series? Or for your narrational structure, maybe what's the conflict of my campaign? So what's the main conflict that your campaign is all about? It's not the one enemy, it's the main conflict. Maybe it's a philosophical question, maybe it's the future of a certain country, maybe it's just the journey of certain heroes from their very beginnings to them becoming gods. Think about what's the main conflict in your overall plot arc. Then there's the conflict of the current season. Normally, the conflict of the season and the conflict of the whole series or the whole campaign is not the same. So normally the conflict of a season focus on a certain enemy or a certain aspect of the overarching plot. And that's essentially the conflict of this specific season or the specific part of your overarching plot line. So what's the main goal you want to convey on this evening? The main topic of this evening you want to touch? That most definitely came out the wrong way. Moving on. And last but not least, what should be the goal of this certain scene? As you can see, it's not possible to always think of all those four different kinds of conflicts when creating a great scene beforehand. And what we're essentially talking about is the preparation for an evening. So, as you know, I'm sitting in the bathroom, right? And thinking about taking down some notes and thinking about, okay, what plot I can come up with today. I'm thinking about those different aspects. I'm thinking about the main conflict of my series, the main conflict of my season, of my episode, and what I want to convey in the certain scene I'm talking about right now. So, for example, in my own role-playing game called Shattered Prophecy, the main conflict always is that the world is going to end. And so I always got the same overarching plotline. The world is going to end, and that's a certainty. So in my season, I tend to focus upon certain aspects of the world ending or certain aspects of elements that will be relevant to the world ending. For example, the actions of certain political characters during this season that will be heavily relevant for the end of the world. So my overarching plotline for this season could be whether a certain king decides to declare war upon a neighboring country or not. So having my series talking about the end of the world and having my season talking about whether a king declares war or not, I can now decide upon which aspect of declaring a war or not I want to look at in this episode today. And maybe the characters, the player characters are currently in the position of messengers. So they need to bring a message to the king, and this message could be highly relevant for the king to decide upon whether to go to war or not. So we said the characters need to get the message to the king, and in this episode, for example, they're trying to seek shelter from an upcoming storm. They're on their way through a dark forest, and they see on the roadside just ahead, there's a small tavern, and as I said, there's a storm coming up and they have to seek shelter. So their goal for this episode is to avoid essentially getting wet. No, this has to be something else. So essentially their goal for this episode is trying to find a place to stay to wait out the storm. And if I make it easy for them, they will waltz in the tavern, they will buy themselves a drink, drink themselves senseless, fall to sleep, wake up, and I can say, okay, that's it. That was my episode or my game session. Have a good night, drive safe, and goodbye. But that would be totally boring. So there has to be conflict. And since I know that the overarching goal for my season is them having a message they want to get to the king, and the overarching goal of the episode is that they need to find shelter from the storm, I have two elements which already make great stuff for coming up with conflicts for the different scenes. Because the storm is driving them to seek shelter somewhere. If they won't find shelter in the tavern, they have to look for shelter somewhere else. And the alternative to the tavern could be like a cave in the woods, and they find some strange frigging cult there who performs human sacrifices. Or they could find the hut of a strange hermit in the woods, who is essentially the augur of some strange god, who's awaited them since the beginning of time. Or it could be a different hut where just a murder took place and the characters are waltzing into crime scene, having to deal with the with the scenery there. You see, the main driver is there is a storm coming up and the characters need shelter. So that will drive them somewhere. They can't just say, okay, I'm waiting here on the road trying to get wet and yeah, that's it. They won't do that. Hopefully they won't do that. Oh, please don't let them do that. Then there's this message they want to get to the king. So it's essential for them that they don't lose this message. So there could be an evil spy awaiting the characters inside the tavern, waiting for them to arrive to steal the message, because his boss is a third kingdom who would really profit from both kingdoms being at war. And so the main goal of this thief is to make sure that this message never arrives at the king. This conflict is essentially taking place on another level. It's taking place on the overarching storyline level for the season, whereas the conflict of whether I find shelter in the tavern or not is taking place on the layer for this episode. And really, I don't really have to cover each and every layer each episode. It's just good to know they are there in order to come up with some great stuff. And what I want to convey to you is that you don't have to prepare a lot of stuff to improvise on the spot what characters are doing, how the world, the game world reacts to the actions of your characters. Because if you know what's your overarching goal and what's your episodic goal, then you can derive ideas on conflicts easily on the spot from those goals and from those conflicts. You can create conflicts very easily because you know what's the goal. So if you're confronted with having to improvise a conflict on the spot, think of it as a catalog from which you can just pick the ideas you need and just pick what comes first to mind. So sometimes the overarching storyline is far more present in my head, and when I have to come up with a certain conflict or game reaction in the world, I just have split seconds to think about, okay, which aspect of my story I want to use for this. And essentially, sometimes that's the overarching plot. Sometimes that's the episodic plot, the plot of the specific episode. Sometimes that's the plot of the specific scene I'm using. And yeah, normally, if all this would be scripted, you should try to balance those. But since we're playing a game here, it's not that easy. So essentially, for a game, for a role-playing game, it doesn't matter where you take your ideas for conflict from, as long as you can access them fast and they are somehow connected to your different plot structures. Then you're fine. We will talk about the fastest techniques and methods to come up with reactions of game worlds and storylines to the actions of your characters in a future episode. But for now, I think the main idea of what the conflict of plot and story is should be much clearer now. If you got any questions regarding what the plot is, or how to create or derive conflicts from your plot, or questions about how to structure your storyline into series, seasons, episodes and scenes, please do not hesitate to ask me those questions in the comment section below. I will be happy to answer them as soon as I see them. And again, if you have any critique, praise, or just want to talk to me, you can contact me over Twitter. This is my Twitter account right here. You can just click on it and ask me some questions if you want to. Again, there's the comment section below. I will read through all your comments and answer them as soon as I see them. And if you liked what you saw, I would really appreciate you giving me a thumbs up directly under this video. And if you want to stay tuned to the awesome content I have already planned for you guys and want to become one part of this great Fumbling Forward family, well, great is maybe exaggerated at this point, but which is not yet, can still be. Next time we're gonna talk about conflict of location and conflict of character constellation, so stay tuned for my next video. Thank you so much for watching this, guys and girls, and hopefully we will be seeing each other again next week. And until then, I hope you have an awesome day and relax and roll as many criticals as you can. Until next time at Fumbling Forward. Woohoo! I got an end screen now. So this is my end screen here, and you can subscribe to my channel down here, and you can find the family members of Fumbling Forward, my dearest friends here on YouTube, here on this side. So gonna take a look at their channels and visit them, say hello from me, and yeah, I hope I see you again next week. Bye bye!